Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Smerick, member of the Advocacy Committee and chair of the Voting Rights Interest Group for League of Women Voters, Washtenaw County. As this is a public presentation, I want to remind everyone that the League is a nonpartisan political organization. We work to increase understanding of public policy issues, such as the importance of guaranteeing the right to vote. The League works to influence policy through advocacy and education. To further this goal, we're pleased that Margaret Leary, our presentation coordinator, is here to speak about the new Michigan State House voting districts approved by the Michigan Independent Citizens Redistricting Commission. Margaret has worked with another League member, Sue Smith, and others at the state and local League level in the process of passing this ballot initiative and following the progress and implementation of these new districts. She is also coordinating presentations to inform voters of their new voting rights. Well, there's so much more we could say about Margaret. I'd like to turn the program over to her. Margaret?
Okay, thank you very, very much. Okay, so this is a review, and I really welcome you to this presentation because this is my trying out on you a short version of an updated show about the MICRC that I would like to be able to present, I would say probably not until after the election in November, because there won't be so much interest in it then. But a lot has happened, and one thing that I think is important is to keep the public, or some small percent of the public, aware of this commission because it's so important. And I always worry about important groups like this getting bad information spread about them. So I really look forward to learning from all of you as you listen to this. I am assuming, and this could be a terribly wrong assumption for which I apologize, that there may be some here who haven't been deeply involved in the MICRC since 2018, the way many of us have been. So I'm going to move on to the actual content here. This is where I usually talk to a lay audience about the League, and you all know these four things, so I'm not going to go into this. But I want to start with a summary of what the League of Michigan and then Washtenaw County role has been in this important event. The League of Women Voters of Michigan noticed long ago the harms caused by Michigan's 40 years of being gerrymandered. In 2017, we won a lawsuit against the existing lines in federal district court in Detroit, and it was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, who refused to support the finding of the district court, saying that it was a political item, not a legal item, according to the court. Meantime, the League and its many partners, NAACP, ACLU, PTV, and so on, were collaborating to create a ballot proposal for a constitutional amendment to take the redistricting power away from the legislature and put it in the hands of an independent citizens redistricting commission. Katie Fahey had newly formed VNP, and VNP wrote its own proposal and kind of skipped ahead of that group that had been working for years and got their proposal approved. They got it on the ballot. Other organizations got on board, although I can tell you that some of them were resentful because they'd worked together for so long. But they got on board, and eventually it got on the ballot, and it was passed by 63% of the voters in November of 2018. That's how we got the MICRC. The League provided in-person and group support led by our own Sue Smith. Statewide, we formed small groups to let potential communities of interest, which are one of the most important kinds of groups that need to be considered, and I'll get into that shortly, how they might make themselves known or how they might know what a community of interest is and how a group that they belong to, it could be a neighborhood, it could be an ethnic group, it could be a religious group, it could be undefined. And the definition of a community of interest is still undefined. One of the lawsuits the league took to the Michigan Supreme Court was to ask the court to please define a community of interest. And the court said, no, we won't do that, because the Constitution clearly says that the only entity in the entire state of Michigan that can do anything having to do with redistricting is the Independent Redistricting Commission. So there we were. Sue Smith earned the respect of the commission's executive director and created a small team of Michigan League members, and I'm on that team, who have watched collectively, not individually, every single meeting of the MICRC whenever, and reported to each other on what was going on. The league has also contributed to lawsuits seeking clarification, as I said, of what a COI is. We continue to observe as the House maps were revised, as a federal court ordered, and Senate maps are now being redrawn. Before I get into the meat of this, I want to shift over a little bit, and I found this information in a wonderful article entitled something like How Michigan Became a Blueprint for Strengthening Democracy. And this information, which is based on census information, was in that article. And what I think I'm showing this slide because I think it demonstrates the importance of the work that we do, that we really have made a difference. I don't just mean the league, I mean all the other groups that are supporting voters and democracy. So this shows how much our work has mattered. In 2022, this shows the increase in registration rates, voting rates for whites, for blacks, and then nationally for blacks. And you can see in the yellow here, the yellow highlights that in Michigan, black and white voter registration rates became equal in 2022. They were not equal in 2018. You can see in the lines there that in 2022, the registration rate for white Michiganders was about 79%, and for blacks, it was about 79%. But in 2018, it had been 76% for blacks and 67%, for whites, and 67% for blacks. In other words, in those 4 years, I think that the changes that we made in voting processes encouraged Black people to not only register more, but to vote more. And you can see that by 2022, the Black registration rate was also really close to being the same as white. So what does that prove? Maybe that happened everywhere. Well, it didn't. If you look at the last two lines, you can see the US Black registration vote rate increased between those 4 years, hardly at all, 0.2%. And the Black voting rate went up by 6%, but still was not close to the Black voting rate in Michigan. It was nationally 51%, and in Michigan, it was 65%. So I think that's just a good illustration of the difference that our work can make. Whoops, going too fast. I have 4 parts in this presentation, and you can see what they are here. Midterm election results, redistricting and gerrymandering, and that's a long section, and then the formation operation and results of the MICRC, and then a report card, partly how other groups and the world at large has responded to what we did, but mostly about the lawsuits that have happened, especially the one that the plaintiffs won at the end of 2022, which has now is in the process of being implemented. Part 2 will provide details about how having the MICRC rather than the legislature following strict rules now in the state constitution draw election district lines made the difference. So here are results comparing 2002, before we had gotten rid of gerrymandering, with 2022, which was the first election using districts that the MICRC had created. And you can see that in 2002, the Republicans controlled everything. And that did not accurately represent the split of Michigan voters. In 2022, 3 Democrats were elected to the top 3 offices. The Congress was 7 Ds and 6 Rs, and you can see the state Senate was 20 Ds to 18 Rs, and the state House 56 to 54. And that more closely, those 3 last types, Congress, the state Senate, and the state House, much more accurately reflect the actual split of voters in Michigan. Now I'm going to talk about the why, why, and how we ended gerrymandering in Michigan. What is redistricting? I'm sure you know all of this, so I'll go over it quickly. It's the process of drawing lines for congressional and legislative districts. How the lines are drawn determines which voters reside in each congressional district. It's about people, not just about geography. In Michigan, we will have 13 congressional districts, having lost 1 in the last census. Each congressional district must have about 775,000 people, total population from the latest census, divided by 435 seats in Congress. We also have 38 Michigan Senate districts and 110 Michigan House districts. Those numbers didn't change and are determined by state law. They don't have anything to do with the Redistricting Commission. Every state gets to determine its own process for drawing these lines. And these lines are drawn. We'll dig now into the details of how those lines are drawn. There are some federal laws about this. First of all, requiring that redistricting be done every 10 years, and that's after the census has been taken. There are no rules nationally about how to draw the lines. There are now rules in Michigan about how to draw the lines. That was what was in the constitutional amendment, among other things. So there are no rules except that we have to follow federal law. We have to follow Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, that blocks district lines that deny minority voters an equal opportunity to, quote, participate in the political process and to elect representatives of their choice. Each state can make its own rules about who and how to draw the election district lines, but must follow all federal law. The other federal law that must be applied is the 14th Amendment, which assures equal protection. Leaping ahead to the current lawsuit that the commission lost, the AG case. In the AG case, about which I will say more later at the end, in spite of the fact that at the trial, the commission talked a lot about how it applied the Voting Rights Act and also talked about how it applied the 14th Amendment. And from watching the commission, I can tell you that they struggled to do both of those. But the court's opinion in the AG case that came out at the end of last year talked only about the 14th Amendment. It said that, I'll get into that later, but the court felt that the commission had paid too much attention to race and wanted them to pay more attention to the 14th Amendment. Okay. Gerrymandering. I'm now, again, I think you understand this, but I just want to make sure. So the problem is that politicians manipulate elections to keep themselves and their party in power, and that's what we call gerrymandering. How does gerrymandering work? I have 2 shots to show you how gerrymandering works. This is an imaginary, admittedly very small state. It has 2 parties, the Greens and the Purples, and its 25 voters need to be divided into 5 election districts, each with 5 people. There are 40% purple voters and 60% green in this imaginary small state. It's clear with this 60-40 greater number, green might win more districts than purple, but how many more? So the map on the left has no lines drawn in. This shows where the purple people and the green people live. They never move from these 4 boxes. They never move at all. This just shows you how they might be divided up by the drawing of election districts. The second one from the left shows districts that are 2 things that are important. They are compact and they are fair. When I say they're fair, because they result in green winning 60% of the districts and purple winning 40%, which is exactly what is shown on the view of it on the left. So the districts are compact and they're fair. The lines are vertically drawn. Now you might think, okay, we'll draw straight lines and that will take care of it. Well, no, that's not the case. The next one, the third one from the left, that labeled districts are compact and unfair. And look why they're unfair. Who wins every single time? Green. Green wins all 5. Green wins 100% and purple won none, just by changing the way the lines are drawn. The one on the right shows districts that are neither compact nor fair. Note the hard turns in the lines. Note that the districts are not compact. They allow purple to win 3 and green to win only 2, the opposite of the result in the compact and fair districts that were shown second from the left. This is called partisan favoring or gerrymandering, and it's what politicians cannot resist doing when they get the chance. We talked about the harms of gerrymandering, and one of the worst ones is that elected officials are not responsive to voters. This is an example of a terribly gerrymandered district. It no longer exists because we no longer have 14 districts, but I'm showing it to you because this is the result of the last redistricting that the legislature did. And this is a practically totally Black area. And it is an example of 2 things of one of the major ways to gerrymandering. Notice that this connects Detroit with Oak Park and Southfield, and that's maybe reasonable, but it is hardly a compact district. You can see what it does. It separates Farmington Hills from Farmington, and those 2 communities share a tremendous amount. This district was over 80% African-American and 79% Democrat, so it always elected a Democrat. Then it went through West Bloomfield and took this snaky route past a few lakes to connect Pontiac, another highly African-American city. This district has gone away, as are all the rest of the districts that were drawn in 2011. And I still show it because it's such a great example. So how could this happen? How could this gerrymandering happen? Wait a minute. Lack of knowledge, technology, and secrecy were the 3 reasons that it happened. And I could say a lot more about this, but I think most of you have lived through it, and so you understand. The lack of knowledge means that people just didn't know this was happening, and this is one of the gerrymandering was happening. They just thought it was really odd that we kept getting the kinds of laws that we did. And the first thing the league did before they even started trying to necessarily work with other groups was to conduct town halls all over the state to find out what people knew about how their legislators were chosen, and they found out that people really didn't know. which made the job of fixing it a lot harder. But when the lines were drawn after the 2000 census, wait a minute, after the 2010 census, in 2011, and the legislature did it. Here's what they did. Only a few of the legislators were involved. They had the best software and they hired experts to use it. In other words, they were well funded. They had technology and secrecy. It was not a public process. It happened in the offices of the lawyers of the legislature, and hence the press and the public were kept out on the basis of attorney-client confidentiality. And then members of the legislature had to vote to enact the new lines into law. But before they voted, each member of the legislature saw only their own district. They didn't see any of the other districts, so they didn't know how much it was all gerrymandered. But if they liked their own district, why would they object? And then they approved all the lines even before they had seen all of them. So this is what I mean when I say that the new process, the MICRC, was designed to eliminate especially secrecy and lack of public knowledge. And if elements of the new process seem extreme, that's why. And that's also why it's in the Constitution and not something that the legislature passed. Because now that it's in the Constitution, and you'll hear me say this more than once, we in Michigan are very, very fortunate in that we have the ability with nothing much greater than what a candidate for office has to do to get on the ballot an amendment to the Constitution of the state. And what's important about that is that in Michigan, the legislature cannot change the Constitution in any manner unless the voters also approve. So that's a reason that we are fortunate, another reason we're fortunate to be here. So here's how the MICRC was formed and operated and what it did. Right now I have a lot more material left than I have time, so I'm going to go fast just to show you what I have, and then I can use any of these slides and some that I have done what PowerPoint calls hiding, which I only recently found out about. I hid some slides. So if you have questions, I can probably answer them. So let's get started. I'm going to also talk about a report card about about what the commission did, and then the recent lawsuit that the commission lost. So Voters Not Politicians formed this group and submitted a ballot initiative, which was proposal 2 that year, to amend the Michigan State Constitution in 2018 to create an independent redistricting commission. You can see here all the number of volunteers that worked on it, and it passed by 61% in November of 2018. And I love the quote that's at the bottom. This slide basically says it all. So here is what the amendment dictates. It also has a list of 7 items that have to be taken into account in drawing the lines. But this is something a little bit broader than how to draw the lines. For example, only the MICRC can draw the lines. It has to be transparent. You have to use 7 prioritized criteria, which I will show you shortly. No politicians are able to affect the decisions or the process, and I'll show you how that was achieved. And it was designed to make secrecy impossible. And that is pretty literally true. Everything that they do, you can watch. You can watch while it happens, or you can watch it afterwards on YouTube. So first of all, I'm going to tell you now about the commission itself. It has 13 members divided up this way. It's very clever. Some states have commissions that have even numbers of people on them. And what happens? They get tied, and then they don't have any way to resolve the tie. So here we very smartly have, call it, in this case, a lucky 13, 4 Ds, 4 Rs, and 5 independents. Eligibility, very easy to be eligible. You have to be registered to vote and eligible to vote in Michigan, and you have to submit an application. Okay, anybody could do that, except there are some ways that someone can be eliminated. And those ways are, I don't have the list here, but I can tell you if you want to know more. Basically, it's anybody who was in the last 5 years a member of one of these bodies that get elected, or that is the State House and Senate or Congress, or have relatives who were or worked for somebody who was an elected official of that sort. It's much more carefully stated than that, but that's the gist of it. Here's how the people were chosen. A lot of people applied, not just the 10,000 who got random mailings, but others. And those were randomly drawn, except that they had to take into account the geographic and demographic makeup of the state. So that we have commission members from the Upper Peninsula, we have 3 from the Detroit area, and so on. And the selection process did give the legislature a chance to get strikes against some of them. And they were able to do that, and that reduced the number to 20, and then they were randomly chosen. So who got chosen? This is the first group of commissioners. And you can see just by looking that they're of different ages, different skin colors, and different sexes. And this was the whole point. The colors show you which are independents, green, reds are Republican, and Democrats are blue. And the 3 people left after they had finished drawing the maps, and what they did had been applied, and they had to resume work because they still had things to do. During that, when I say they still had things to do, they were, in spite of the fact that they had drawn all the districts, there was a lot of work just as an organization that they had to wind up. So they didn't meet very often, but they still had work to do. During that time, one person died. Let's see, Doug Clark died, and MC Rothhorn and Dustin Witches both resigned. Witches resigned because he had moved out of the state, and Rothhorn resigned for other reasons. But they have been replaced by 3 new people, and those people, of course, are of the same political persuasion as the people that they replaced. Here are one of the most important things. These are the criteria for drawing the election district lines. They have to follow these, and they have to follow them in this order. And they have to have equal population and comply with federal law, including the Constitution, which means the 14th Amendment in particular, and the Voting Rights Act. That's the very first thing. They have to be geographically contiguous. They have to reflect the state's diverse population and communities of interest that share cultural or historical characteristics or economic interests. Can't give a disproportionate advantage to a political party. They can't favor or disfavor an incumbent or a candidate, and they have to consider county, city, and township boundaries and be reasonably compact in that order. And that's not easy. When I first read it, I thought, oh, okay, I don't know what a community of interest is, but I know what geographically contiguous is and all the rest of them, but it did not turn out to be easy. They did a huge amount of public participation as they were drawing these maps. They had all of their meetings were public. Oh, and here's the other stuff they overcame. First of all, they overcame a botched up census. They overcame what happened when COVID struck. They were not able to meet in person, which they had thought they would be able to. The census came in late, months later. It was supposed to be done, I think, in April, but they didn't get it until September. And that made a big difference, those months, in the time that they had. And they had a lot of input and transparency. This is the staff that they had initially. I have lined out the people who no longer work there. Sue-Ann Hammersmith was replaced with Edward Woods, who is still the executive director. And he was their communications and outreach director. So he's been very good at doing those two things as well as being their ED. And then they had consultants, and they basically still have these same consultants, which did what it says here they do, and they are all still used. Particularly the mapping consultant, Election Data Services, helps them tremendously. And if you have a chance, they are still doing mapping now for the new Senate districts. You can go to their website and find out when they meet. And I'm not guaranteeing that it will be interesting, but I think you'll learn a lot about what they do if you happen to hit on a very productive meeting. Here's all the things they did, all these presentations, public hearings. Again, this was to overcome, it's perhaps an extreme effort, but I don't think so, overcome the fact that people didn't know what was going on before, and that they are now required by the Constitution of Michigan to hold all these hearings. And all of these details are in the Constitution. The constitutional amendment is like none I've ever seen before. It's pages and pages of 8.5 by 11 single-spaced pages. So you're very lucky that I didn't decide to talk to you about it by reading it all to you. At any rate, they got finished in December, and these are the 15 proposed maps that they published, and they do the same thing now when they are redoing the House maps first, and now the Senate maps. They will make some maps that they want the public to comment on so that they can choose the final one. Each map has to be tested for its compliance with the 7 prioritized criteria that I showed you shortly ago. I'm not going to explain all of this to you. When I do longer presentations, I go over this to some extent. And I did it once for a group of just ordinary people who wanted to know more about it. And when I showed them this part, let me just, oh no, now something's gone wrong. There, that's what I wanted. These are the ways of measuring partisan fairness. And there are several ways that have been accepted by political scientists. This is how population deviancy, the districts have to be within a certain percentage of reflecting the correct number. For example, the members of Congress, 13 members of Congress, you just take the population of Michigan and divide it by 13, and that is the number that we have to have in each congressional district. And then this tells you what proportion that is, and there are limits on what that can be. And then here, most and least compact, and then Black voting age population, Asian voting age population, and I can't see the other two. I don't know how to get rid of your faces. At any rate, every single map that was finally considered met all of these criteria. So they held all these public hearings before they completed its work. They used those maps that I just showed you, and then chose the 3 final maps. So now I'm going to show you the 3 final maps. These are the maps that will be in effect unless they're modified. And so far, this is the congressional districts. And so far, there's been no lawsuit about the congressional districts. So this shows what the congressional districts are. I'll show you our local ones more closely in a couple slides. But you can see one of the big changes is that because of the population, and because we now only have 13 districts instead of 14, the congressional district 1 goes much, much farther down into the lower peninsula. It used to just barely get into the upper peninsula, into the lower peninsula. And then these are the Senate maps that were adopted. And of course, we have 38 senators, so these districts are smaller than congressional. And then here are the ones for the 110 House districts. All of these had to be approved by a sufficient number of the members of the commission, and all of these, of course, were. The Washtenaw County Congressional District is quite interesting, and someday I'll learn how to, maybe I can do it now. I wonder what'll happen here. There, I got rid of all your faces. I'm sorry. But I wanted to see the map. Okay, here you see our 6th congressional district. And the total population is almost is what it has, pretty close to what it has to be. And then it tells you the race over here. The geography of it looks pretty rational. It's pretty much Washtenaw County here, and then goes over a little bit into Wayne. And then here's an odd thing. Can you see down? I don't think you can see can you see my cursor? No. You can see this going down, this jiggly line. This is creating a community of interest. What is it? Any guesses?
At the Huron River?
Absolutely correct. Goes all the way down here. So guess who is in our congressional district? Grosse Ile is in our congressional district because we all care so much about the Huron River. So that shows you one of the communities of interest that I'm able to identify. Okay, let's go on. I'm stuck again. Okay, 14th. House districts, and then that. So these are all of our districts. And then here's on to a little bit about how the commission's work was received. And I originally had a lot more information in here, which I've now eliminated because I was afraid it would be too much and that you probably all had seen it, but it was really favorably reviewed by many organizations. The Princeton Gerrymandering Project highly approved of it, and other national groups approved of it. There were many positive headlines, and Michigan was really being held up as an example of what could be done to get rid of gerrymandering. The lawsuit that was filed, AG versus Benson, was unique in that it was the second of only 2 lawsuits of the many that were filed against the commission, including some that the league participated in. The league, for example, wanted the Michigan Supreme Court to define what a community of interest is, and the court refused. But it did lose 2 lawsuits. One of them was when they held a non-public meeting claiming attorney-client privilege for something they were discussing. The press immediately filed a lawsuit and said, the Constitution is clear, you cannot hold meetings that are non-public. And the commission lost that, and they had to make public the content of what went on in the meeting. The second one was this AG lawsuit filed by Detroiters well, Benson is the Secretary of State, but really it was the commission. And that case found 7 House and 6 Senate districts to be unconstitutional because they had used race too much, violating the 14th Amendment. The court very oddly did not mention the Voting Rights Act, which the MICRC had also carefully considered because they were required to. And Sue Smith, who attended every bit of that trial in person, told me that one of the remarkable things was that during the trial, the VRA was mentioned many times, and yet the court's opinion doesn't mention it at all. At any rate, the commission is doing what the court ordered it to do, which was to correct 7 House districts. Now, when you correct districts, you can't, it's almost, you can't change the lines of one district without affecting other districts, obviously, because they're all butting up against each other. So in order to correct the House districts, they had to change the lines for 11 districts, not just 7. There is a complicated process for approving that revised version. The court has to approve it. The court had a special master that also had to approve it. And the commission's redrawing of the House districts has already been approved. That was put on a high priority because the need to file, I think by sometime in the middle of April, if you wanted to run for Congress. For the state house. So they are now working on the state Senate plans. There are 6 or 7 of those that have to be changed. The final map is due to the court on June 27th, and the court has to adopt the final plan. But I said June 27th, and the court has to adopt the final plan by July 26th. Because they also have to go through a process, not only the court, but the special master has to approve it. This lawsuit was filed in March of 2022, and the court's opinion came out December 21st last year. The commission had filed an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the court decided on January 22nd this year not to issue a stay of applying what the court had required to be done. So the commission withdrew its appeal last April 25th this year. They are now redrawing Senate districts 1, 3, 6, 8, 10, and 11, and all of which are currently represented by Democrats. On April 15th this year, the court approved the Senate remedial plan. That means that it's the plan that the commission will use to redraw the maps. They're being very careful. They don't want them to undertake a process that the court eventually won't approve of. So each step along the way requires the court's approval. The final map is due to the court on June 27th. And then the final map has to be determined by July 26th. The reason I give nearly a month for that is that the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, the commission, a reviewing special master, and the parties may all file documents, and the court will adopt a remedial plan by the 26th of July. It's designed so that any disagreements can be resolved by that time. So what comes next? We have new house maps. What else? The common problem in the districts that were found unconstitutional is that they extended from Metro Detroit out of Wayne County into Oakland and Macomb counties. The commission faced competing demands, the 14th Amendment, equal protection of the law, and the Federal Voting Rights Act, which requires that voting groups must have an equal opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. The MICRC used the VRA, but the court did not address the VRA issue in its December 23rd decision. Now the commission is not allowed, because the court said it used race too much. The commission is now not allowed to see any information on racial makeup of proposed maps until after the maps are complete. After that, they can tweak the maps to try to make them more compliant with the VRA. We only have one election by which to judge the maps. More suits may be filed after other elections, 2024, 2026, 2028, and 2030. Therefore, it is way too, oops, did I skip something? Oh, here. Therefore, it's too early to assume that the work of this commission is done. You can't object or sue about election districts until there have been elections. And we've only had one involving the districts drawn by the MICRC. We have to wait and see. After the 2030 census, which will have significant differences from that of 2020, And by that, I mean the census itself is going to have different questions on it than it had the last time. That would be a whole talk in itself. A new commission will be selected using the same process as before because it's in the state constitution. The legislature can't change that. So here's a reminder, while I'm talking about this, of the important role of the important fact that Michigan is one of only 7 states that use independent commissions to draw lines for Congress and state legislatures. And because only about 14 states allow voter-initiated constitutional amendment without legislative interference, gerrymandering may continue in many states. Sue Smith continues to head a team of League of Women Voters of Michigan members. I've said this before, but one of us watches every meeting and we report to the others. And the League's state legislative updates always include the MICRC and what's going on with it. Here are the resources that I like to use. Each one has many sections, and I'm sure you know about most of these, maybe not the Princeton Gerrymandering Center. But I really encourage you, if you haven't already, to take a look at the MICRC website. It has a huge amount of information. For example, if you want to know more about the 3 people who are relatively new to the commission, you can find out where they live, what their profession or job is, and other details about them. It's a wonderful website, but it's got so much on it that it could be a little difficult to find, but I encourage you to do that because the organization is so important and because the League had such a big role to play in having it created. All the MICRC meetings are recorded on YouTube and they're viewable for free. They seem to stay up there forever. You can look at recent meetings, and after the meeting, a transcript will eventually occur of what was said. They wrote a lengthy report on its work from which the next MICRC can learn a lot. I really hope that people will remain aware of the MICRC until the chance to apply for it comes around again in 2030. So I'd love to hear questions now, and I apologize for my clumsiness there for a few minutes. Any questions? I can't see you, so I don't. Is somebody watching for questions?
Yes. Margaret, can you
Yeah.
stop the screen share? That will help.
Oh, okay. I will, just a second. Gotta get my cursor over there. I can see where it is. There. Okay.
Margaret, my first question is, now that we're in this post-district stage almost, how can the League be most useful in spreading the word about how successful this was, even though there were glitches in the first time around?
Well, I hope that I hope to help the League create a new PowerPoint that describes sort of like what I did, but much better, written by us who can think about what it's important for people to know about how this happened. I could make a list of the 8 or 10 things that I think that should include, but I'm hoping that we can start to include this as one of the presentations that we can offer to people. Some people might not care. I mean, if you were 90 years old, you might not care. And if you were 5 years old, you might not even understand any of it, but there is certainly a large population of people who care about this. An almost preliminary thing that we could do that the League has done in the past is to support the census, because because the census is something, the reason the census was late is that there was a determined effort by the highest elected officials in the country to hold it back or to keep it from happening or to have it happen in a way that would discourage people from responding to it. And the league actually had started to work to encourage people to respond to the census. And I remember visiting a number of organizations which were which served people who were unlikely to respond to the census, meaning mostly the census counts everybody. The census counts you whether you're a citizen or not. It just counts people who live here. And because of things that had happened at the highest level of our government, there were groups of people who really did not trust giving their private information to private information, meaning every question on the census to people from the government who knocked on their door. And so we tried to get to those people, but we are not, or at least speaking for myself, I'm not the kind of person that a lower income person of color who wasn't a citizen would want to give a bunch of information to. So we worked by going to the organizations that serve those people. But then with COVID, we weren't even able to do that because we couldn't do anything in person. So supporting the census is something we can do. And I think also just to keep people aware of how important that this is. And I'm not sure what else would be helpful. It partly depends on what other lawsuits emerge, because you can't have a lawsuit until you've had an election. I mean, you can't have a lawsuit about an election until there's been an election. And the league didn't file its lawsuit, the one that it won at the federal district level, until there had been enough elections to show exactly which districts were not having good results. So I'm not quite sure, but those are the things that come to my mind. That's a good question. Thank you, Sue.
You're welcome. Any other questions that you either want to put in the chat or raise your hand? I can't see everyone either. Oh. There we go. Well, thank you, Margaret.
Sure. I appreciate your listening.
It's very important to remind us of the history, and often I know I haven't followed this as carefully as it's been implemented. So it's very important for us to figure this all out. And thank you for all of you for coming. And since this has been recorded, this will be available on the YouTube channel soon after some editing.
Is there any way to find out over time how many people look at it, Sue?